Good morning, students. Happy to be with you today. It's Monday morning, and today we're going to take a little bit of a detour. You've been working so hard, you've been doing a lot of writing, that I just want you for the next couple of days to do a little bit of listening to some more notes on Period 8. Period 8 was such an important period, not only because it was the time of the Cold War, but also you could look at Period 8 in kind of two parts: the Cold War and the Korean and Vietnam War, and the Civil Rights Movement. And you cannot kind of gloss over the importance of the 1960s and the Civil Rights Movement. So I want to talk a little bit about that today. The new movement for civil rights and liberal efforts to expand the role of government generated a range of political and cultural responses. It was a huge part that shaped American history. So during and after World War II, civil rights activists and leaders, most notably Martin Luther King Jr., combated racial discrimination utilizing a variety of strategies, including legal challenges, direct action, and nonviolent protest tactics. So that's Asia Philip Randolph right there. The threat to march on Washington, remember that was, there was pressure to deregulate and desegregate. I should not say deregulate, desegregate the military. This is in 1941. So this is during World War II, and FDR gave in and gave equal opportunity employment. That was the executive order, if you remember, that 8802 that banned discrimination in defense industry jobs. The Congress of Racial Equality, or CORE, is then developed, and that was in 1942. It was one of the earlier civil rights organizations. They actively supported sit-ins, and we'll get into sit-ins here. But really, if you want to look at all of the civil rights, you can look at it through the Double B campaign. And I know I've mentioned the Double B campaign, that they were Black Americans were looking for victory abroad in World War II, but they were also looking for victory at home. And so the Double B campaign is really this kind of two-faceted way for Black Americans to achieve their civil rights and be a true part of American society. The Fair Employment Practices Commission banned discrimination in the workplace, and this allowed that implementation of the Executive Order 8802. The Montgomery bus boycott, you can see Rosa Parks there over on the left. This is happening because of Rosa Parks, what she started. So after Rosa Parks, historically said, I'm not giving up. I'm not giving up my seat. This was the first kind of large-scale demonstration against segregation, and a lot of it is led by Martin Luther King Jr. He kind of heads up this Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He goes down to Montgomery, and he takes part in this nonviolent civil disobedience trend. It happened for probably about a whole year, where they boycotted the bus system, and that was the first real organized effort, and it worked. It did a lot. The integration of Central High School and the Little Rock Nine. We're going to get to this, not today, another day, and we're going to hippo probably one of the more famous pictures, I would imagine you've seen it, of the Little Rock Nine. But this is when Little Rock, Arkansas, this is when the National Guard was called in. Ike is the president at this time. Eisenhower is the president at this time. The governor had prevented the integration of the Central High School, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, that's short SNCC is short. Ella Baker was a famous college student who she organized college student sit-ins. And a sit-in was just that, where you protested. I think we looked at a picture. This is like a sit-in, where you are protesting essentially what's happening. And you see teach-ins, and there were sit-ins as well. Ella Baker kind of coordinated that effort for young black students and young black Americans. The Greensboro lunch counter sit-ins. I'm not sure if we really understand what lunch counters were. So first of all, there was a store back in the 60s, 70s, maybe in the 80s, called Woolworths. And Woolworths you probably don't know what a 5 and dime is either. Woolworths is kind of like a Walmart on a small scale, but they also would have had like a restaurant, like a little diner there. It was a store where you could get kind of just about anything, but Woolworths were segregated, and there were areas that you could not, if you were a black American, you could not sit there. And in Greensboro, North Carolina, they started these lunch counter sit-ins, essentially. And so they sat at the whites only area, and you didn't do that. Freedom rides this was a violent period. It's when civil rights activists rode buses in the South to protest segregation, and freedom rides often resulted in some violence. I'd like you to take a look at this, the embedded link I have here. This is on a literacy test that was given, it says Louisiana, but I'm pretty sure it was Mississippi. It was an impossible test. And if you look at just a couple of the things that you had to do, I don't know if any of us, well, first of all, the directions are so, like, they don't even make sense. But you also have to do it in 10 minutes or you fail, and you can't get not even one wrong, or you fail. This was another, I would like to say that, black codes are not happening, but this was another example of trying to subvert or stop any justice or social equality for black Americans. Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail. So 2 things that I want you to do today. One is look at that literacy test, and also listen to a part of Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail. He's put in jail when he went to Birmingham to protest segregation. He's put in jail on absolutely bogus charges, and he writes this famous letter from it. In fact, he had to write most of the letter on pieces of newspaper that his lawyer would bring him the newspaper to read, and then he would write his speech on like the margins, and the guards didn't catch him, and then he would give it back to his lawyer, and the lawyer put it together. It's a very long speech. You don't have to listen to it all, but I would like you to listen to just a bit of it to really hear his voice and hear what he's saying. The March on Washington. The March on Washington is where he gives the famous "I Have a Dream" speech. So after he gets he's out of jail, he gives the famous "I Have a Dream" speech. Freedom Summer. This is continuing with like the freedom rides. Again, A very violent time. They were trying to increase voter registration all over the South and voter participation, and it became a very violent period. Fannie Lou Harper, Hamper, and the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. Fannie Lou Hamper was, it was a terrible story, but she was a black woman who had endured they called it a Mississippi appendectomy. A Mississippi appendectomy was essentially, she went in to the doctor. Of course, the doctor is white. And they discover that she's pregnant, and they give her an appendectomy. And that means that they took the baby out, and they never told her. And this happened oftentimes, and it was so common. It was so commonplace to abort black women's children without their knowledge that it became known as a Mississippi appendectomy, essentially just in order to stop children from being born into black families. It was the most cruel-hearted, horrible thing. I mean, a sickening thing to think of. But she's the head of the Freedom Mississippi Democratic Party, and she's a strong civil rights activist. John Lewis was a United States representative from Georgia, and he was also an activist. He was the chairman of SNCC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. The Selma March you might be familiar with. This was known as Bloody Sunday. This is when they were going to march in Montgomery, Alabama. They were attacked by state and local officials, and it was a peaceful march. It was a Sunday, and it turns into what's known as Bloody Sunday. Motown music came across at this time. If any of you have ever been to Detroit is looked at as the birthplace of Motown. And this was kind of the African American crossover to pop music and protests of the age. Now, it seemed like really upbeat, fun music, but if you listen to the lyrics of Motown music, there's a lot of social undertones of what is happening to African Americans in the United States. But Motown is dominating airwaves in especially pop music. Thurgood Marshall in the NAACP. He was a lawyer. He becomes the head of the NAACP, the National Advancement for the Advancement for Colored People is what it's called. Eventually, Thurgood Marshall becomes the first black Supreme Court justice, and he again is also a social rights activist, a black activist. So we're actually just going to stop there for the day. I'd like you to do those two things. Look at that literacy test and listen to just a bit of Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail. All you need to really do is Google Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail and listen to just a little bit of audio. I'd really like you to hear his voice and hear him read some of this letter. All right, that's it for the day. Have a great week. I'll talk to you a little bit on Thursday and Friday about some more writing and the detour we will take. All right, have a great one. Bye.